So good morning, colleagues and friends and distinguished guests and panelists. It's such a pleasure to be here with you this morning for this session on building business action fit for children in East Asia Pacific in the next decade. My name is Ida Hillestead, and I'm the Child Rights and Business Manager at UNICEF's Regional Office for East Asia and the Pacific. And the context of this conversation could not be more important. Each and every day, business, large and small, affect the lives and the rights of children everywhere. And in fact, business impact on the full spectrum of rights as outlined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It links to employment practices, it links to product development, formulation, marketing, and advertising, environmental impacts, land acquisition, employee behavior, data mining, and many others. And the Children's Rights and Business Principles, whose 10-year anniversary that we are celebrating this year, ask a simple, but yet a very fundamental question. How can we ensure that this interaction between business and children doesn't involve any harm and doesn't infringe on their rights? The Children's Rights and Business Principle were the very first tool to clearly articulate how the corporate responsibility to respect children's rights can be implemented in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the community. They built on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and over the past decade, the principles and the actions they have inspired have stood as an affirmation that change is possible, that children can be protected from harm and neglect, that they can be safe at home, or online, or in the communities in which they live, that children need not resort to work in order to survive, that parents and caregivers can earn enough money to give their children the very best start to their lives. Over the next hour and a bit, we will review the progress and response by business and governments and civil society to the call for action which was set out in the Children's Rights and Business Principles. And we hope to inspire all of you to accelerate action to further advance business respect for children's rights. And I'm really pleased to be joined by a very distinguished set of panelists today for this session. On my right, we have Anita Ramasastry, Professor of Law and Director of the Sustainable International Development Graduate Program at the University of Washington. We have Philip Ling on my left, who heads Sustainability at Digi Telecommunications in Malaysia. And we're also honored to have Undra, the Chief Executive Officer at the Mongolian chapter of the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry in Mongolia, and Mr. Luhur Budijarso, who is the Special Advisor to the Minister of Social Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. We're going to hear from each of our speakers, and after some follow-up questions and discussion, we will welcome interventions and insights and questions from all of you joining us in this room today in Bangkok, or if you're online as well. And for those watching on Zoom, please add your questions in the chat box. So as part of this exciting celebration and commemoration of the 10-year anniversary of the Children's Rights and Business Principles, we would like to first show you a very short video. So I'm handing over to our tech people. Thank you.
10 years ago, a landmark set of principles was developed.
I welcome the launch of the Children's Rights and Business Principles.
Pre 2 godine UNICEF je pokrenuo akciju sa ciljem da definiše principe koje bi kompanije trebalo da poštuju kada su u pitanju deca I njihova prava.
And when I think about sustainability, it's really about ensuring that we leave this world a better place for the next generation.
Building on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the CRBP were the first comprehensive set of principles to guide companies on the range of actions they can take to respect children's rights in the workplace, marketplace, and community. The CRBP call on companies everywhere and of all sizes to integrate respect for children's rights into their core business activities, from decisions and strategies to business models and wider sustainability efforts. And they can be used by governments to ensure that business policy and regulation creates an environment that builds that respect. Over the past 10 years, the principles have served as an inspiration for many businesses, regardless of their size, sector, or location. inspiring action in management suites, farms, and factories, and creating change in law, standards, and practice addressing business impact on children. There is much to celebrate, but much more that needs to be done.
And we are talking more and more about intergenerational justice. We are creating a very, very difficult world for our children and their children and grandchildren.
Achieving sustainable change means holistic action by businesses, investors, and policymakers, with children's rights and children's voices at the center. We need businesses and governments everywhere to play their part. Together, we can make the next 10 years a better decade for every child, everywhere.
And now, to help us set the scene for today's session, I have the great pleasure to invite Anita to share some reflections about the state of embedding children's rights in responsible business conduct in Asia Pacific. Anita is the Henry M. Jackson Professor of Law and Director of the Sustainable International Development Graduate Program at the University of Washington, but I think most of you know her in her role as a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights that she just completed. So Anita, over to you to help us set the scene. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ida, and congratulations. I think this is a really interesting time as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the UNICEF's child rights principles in terms of business and human rights. We're just a little bit shy of, or longer than a decade for the UN guiding principles. So we really had 10 years plus of this business and human rights dialogue. But I need to say, what comes next? And UNICEF has a really excellent document focusing on charting the course, looking at recommendations for governments and for business on that next decade. The UN Working Group, which I was part of until August, published a roadmap for the next decade of business and human rights more broadly. And I have to say that one of the lessons from all of this is that we tend to have siloed children's rights over the previous decade, and we need to do more to really embed it into a larger, more holistic view of business and human rights. Because I would say that the working group, for example, I think we tended to think of child rights as UNICEF's, right? That there was a separate set of principles and that those issues were going to be dealt with by UNICEF. And we need, I think, an integrated approach. So a decade later, I think that's one of the key messages that we all need to take away. How do we think about child rights, not as a secondary issue or a side issue, but a really integral issue? And that's what I'll just share with you in my brief remarks today, is the next decade we call the decade of action. And so one key commitment we all need to make is to think about child rights as at the center, not at the periphery. So as a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and my observations are about Asia, but really are about really everywhere on these points, is that most of the time when we've engaged in country visits or engaged with companies, what we tend to see is that the focus has been on child labor, that this has really been kind of the key priority as we think about the past decade, that this is where companies are focused. Part of that is because it's an issue, of course, of serious concern, but it's also because policymakers, if we think about governments, have driven the agenda in that direction. So when we look at national action plans on business and human rights, children typically come in when we talk about forced labor, that there's a sort of basket focusing on forced labor, child labor, but that children's rights are not infusing national action plans as they should be. So I think step one is that policymakers need to set the tone by really focusing on a basket of different issues and putting children at the center. So how can we do that? Well, I want to commend UNICEF again on focusing on this idea of family-friendly workplace, right? The governments and companies need to set policies, and the pandemic, the working group has noticed, really highlighted this, that supporting the needs of working parents, right, and the workforce, which is vital, as we discovered during the pandemic, right, to vibrant, sustainable economies, means that we need to provide families and children with the support that they need so that work is sustainable, right? People aren't disposable. Parents have essential critical roles. And so we need that. And so I think that's a key message, right? Family friendly. And while we might not call that children's rights, it is children's rights, right? That children have a right to a sustainable and healthy future. And we can't do that if the parents are not able to participate in that. The second is on a focus on land and the environment that we also need to think about as we think about climate, as we think about the future, that child rights are really important. And what does that mean? So my job is to really illustrate that. One is on the right to a healthy environment, right? A new human right that the UN General Assembly has recognized, which is that if we don't have clean air, if we don't have clean waters, if we don't have these things for children, then we're not providing them with a future, but it's really critical to their own development to have that healthy environment. And another example of that as we think about resources is the right to water, right? That is a critical, there are many of these rights that we think of as environmental rights, which are really critical to the development of healthy children. So I would say that land and the environment is very important in the child rights agenda. The third, which again, UNICEF has highlighted is another issue for the next decade, is marketing and advertising, right? When we think about sort of the health and well-being of children, and how, especially in the food and beverage sector, marketing and advertising happens. And it's beyond marketing and advertising. It's really about the fact that policymakers have strong lobbying from these companies around these issues, right? And so in terms of the idea of safe and healthy food and nutrition for our children, we need to really give governments strong tools so that they can actively promote policies that are beneficial to children and families and resist sort of corporate pressure, which exists globally. We can think of, again, sort of unsafe or unhealthy sugar products or not nutritious products, tobacco in the form now of electronic cigarettes and vaping. There are any number of issues, but the working group has just released a report that will be presented to the General Assembly. I led that work with my colleague, who's the current chair, Fernanda, before I left the working group, focusing on, especially in the area of food and nutrition, what are policy tools that can be used so that governments can stand firm on appropriate regulation. Last couple of issues are children defenders. So UNICEF recommends putting children at the center, but not by thinking about what they need, but asking them what they need. And this is really critical. And we tend to think of children as small children, but children is a broad category. And so part of what we need to understand is that stakeholder consultation is about asking children what they need and what they want. And why is that important? They are our future and they are active. As we think about the climate agenda, if we think about issues of innovation and entrepreneurship, the digital space, we need to listen to children. Youth are the greatest, right? There's just, as we look at many of our countries, the majority of the population is young. And so we need their voices. And so we need to put children at the center. The Committee on the Rights of the Child has a whole policy and program around what they call child rights defenders. When we talk about human rights defenders, we often forget children. And I just want to illustrate, I'm going to give you two names and then you're going to say, oh yes, children are defenders. Malala Yousafzai and Greta Thunberg, right? They are youth, they are defenders. They need our support. They need our protection, perhaps even more than defenders who are adults. So we need their voices, but we also need to nourish and protect them as defenders. And similarly, in the area of security, as we look at the world and the conflicts that are existing now, we need to think about protections for children. And again, just an illustration to say, well, what does that mean, Anita? When we think about active conflict, the fact that children, right, are recruited into conflict often in certain ways or capacities, or asked to facilitate or be close to armed conflict is something that we have to address. So just to say that the UNICEF agenda is a bold one, but is a critical one that puts children's voices at the center. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. Such important words. And I take away this need to infuse child rights into the wider business and human rights discourse and agenda. Thank you for those, for that encouragement as well. I really take note of that. So let's kick off our panel and we will start with the business perspective led by Philip from DG in Malaysia. And Philip, he heads their sustainability at DG Telecommunication and has been actively leading DG's corporate sustainability program in the last decade, focusing on ESG, on human rights and digital empowerment. Philip, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Let me just introduce myself. Philip Ling, I'm from a integrated telco in Malaysia. But we are part of a larger group. We are part of the Telenor Group, which is based in Norway. So some of our other sister companies are in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and over here in Asia, it's in Myanmar. Used to be in Myanmar. We've unfortunately have to leave. Thailand, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Right. So just to start off, I definitely resonate. Sorry, the slides up. Yeah, you can put up my slides. To resonate with what Anita said. Yes, 10 years ago, when we first adopted the UN guiding principles, it was from a risk perspective. That was the first time we talked about children, like we said, forced labor, child labor within the organization. But in the past decade, we've realized that things have changed and how we look at this. If you can just go next on the slide. We realized that there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at it beyond risk, but to look at this as an opportunity. Could you click the slide for me? Thank you. Yeah. So as we build on our due diligence in human rights, we realized that you can actually do a double materiality, right? And one reason, the driving thought for that is that we've realized now a quarter of our customers are actually children, right? And these are people who are driving the business to a certain extent. Children are early adopters of technology, right? So whether you're talking about Fitbit or in the future IoT, they'll be the first ones to try it out, right? And these are the first ones today in the market who will give response to these technologies in the market. So it became very apparent for us that we have to look at children as a group of stakeholders. And in 2017, 2016, we actually started using UNICEF's MOCREA, Mobile Operators Child Rights Self-Impact Assessment. And that kind of opened up a more understanding for us on how, when you talk about looking at young people as stakeholders, what does that mean for us in particular? And as we go ahead, I'll just throw out some examples in our journey. One of the examples, as you can see up here, is data privacy. Now, we realize that a lot of our customers, when they sign up for our products and services, the terms and conditions is always text-based. It's a long document, a few pages, and we realize that none of our young people are reading it, right? And yet this is something that relates to them because they are the ones who's putting a lot of their content, a lot of their personal information through our services on the internet. So we've decided that we need to communicate, example, digital rights to our children using age-appropriate information, whether in infographics, whether in video assets or in audio assets. And we realize that children kind of choose which type of platforms they want to engage with. Next, please. So as we advance this dialogue on human rights, we also realized that a lot of these young people are actually now moving into the workforce. In Malaysia, by 2025, it is estimated that 27% of our workforce will be Generation Z. No longer are we talking about Y. Y is already in the workforce. And we see that Generation Y is actually disrupting the workforce. You have heard from a lot of corporates that it's very hard to retain young talents, right? They stay in your organization 3 years, 4 years. Just as you want to promote them to a managerial level, they go out and strike on their own. Now, this is a discussion that's being taken. Why is it that it's getting harder and harder to retain young talents? And it's again going back to the fact that are you looking at what the values that they're looking for? One term that's very commonly used in the corporate world is a triple bottom line: profit, people, and planet. But we realize that with young people, they are no longer talking about profit, people, and planet. They're talking about progress, people, and planet, right? And as we get a lot of this young people. So one program that we have in our organization is called a CXO Apprentice. It is not a management trainee. It's a shadowing program where we get top talents, young people, and they shadow the C-suite in all meetings and in all programs that they go to. They to a certain extent, they have to sign a non-disclosure because sometimes the C-level goes to some high-level meetings and they bring along their protege, right? And these are young people who actively engage with their C-levels, telling them, no, I don't think this works for the next decade. This is not what I'm seeing as a trend. And of course, they bring in different values. They pivot the strategy. They disrupt the way the company thinks. And we find that is actually very refreshing. Because if you don't pivot and disrupt, you will continue to do things the way it has always been done, right? Two more examples. One, of course, we have a 6 months maternity policy for our young people. The thinking behind it has also been very different to what most corporates think. Most corporates will come and say that, how can I lose a talent for 6 months? What happens to the portfolio? But the way we've approached it is that if I see a talent, a young talent, which I want to retain, but she is actually now in a bit of dilemma because you're forcing her to choose between inflexible work, career, and family. And if you want to retain that talent, you need to be able to understand what's important for her. And in that 6 months, we can actually bring in another talent as a temporary talent. And usually you bring in someone younger, right? Because then someone who works for you 6 months, and of course, as they are replaced with the lady who came back from maternity, you actually have an ambassador outside there who wants to come back to work for you because they've gotten a taste of what the organization looks like. And so if you really believe in the values of your organization, you actually believe that you can have talent come in and go, and they would like to come back in the near future, right? So again, this is what we truly mean by sustainability. Then on the other front, just to again dovetail on what Anita said, asking children what do they want. So in our digital strategy, on digital programs, which is both digital literacy as well as digital safety, we've now done almost annually, if not more than annually, surveys with young people. What do you understand about digital privacy? What do you understand about digital safety online? What do you understand about digital literacy? So we've stopped with building programs on the desktop within our own meeting rooms, but we started going out and asking them what works, right? Because even example, what you see down there is a lot of video content that we have out there. It's created by children for children, right? Because we've realized that paid content is out, right? Even when I came to this conference, looking at hotels, I'm not going to the hotel's website to look at how good it is. I'm just looking at peer reviews. Whichever peer reviews tells me that this is the best place to stay, I'll stay there. Same with children. Children are looking at peer reviews, even on brands, right? And if you don't have children who believe in you as an ambassador, you will lose out in the long term. Because this group of children, Generation Z and Y, will become future leaders. They are tomorrow's customers, they are tomorrow's talents. And why don't you make them co-creators today, right? So again, organic and authentic content is king. Last but not least, we understand also that children, being that today they have access to so much information online, they can easily see through if a company is trying to do a one-off short stint with them, right? And we've realized that unless we are consistent in the programs that we're doing, it doesn't make an impact for young children. They will not talk about it. Young bloggers will not talk about it if they realize that your campaign is a one-off short stint, right? So example, in our digital literacy, we've gone around 4 years on that journey. Right now, we are actually translating our coding modules to sign language together with UNICEF. And the translators are children, right? Because our children are telling us, I don't want to learn it from a translator who's my parents' age. I want it to learn from a peer, for the inclusive society. Similarly, if you see at the bottom slide, my last slide, various cartoons on internet safety, on scams, on frauds. And the reason we have to build it in different cartoons and different formats, because we realize that age-appropriate information engages at that level. You cannot expect that I just put out one cartoon and all children from age 3 until 12 is going to watch it. No, they are demanding various content. So no longer are children coming to us. We realize we have to go and meet them and ask them what they want and then deliver it. And then you'll see that it resonates, it comes back. The data that you're looking for, good data, quality data, response comes from them. So I will stop here and then we can discuss more in detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip. And it's wonderful to hear from a company that adopted the children's rights and business principles already 10 years ago, and all the work that you've done to look at the comprehensive range of impacts that DG Business may have on children's rights, cutting across both your core business policies and practices, but also these other impact areas around digital literacy or skills development and so forth. It's very inspiring. And I guess the challenge ahead of us, of course, is to ensure that how do we move beyond these islands and pockets of really good practice to reach that scale that is needed in order to see real transformation happening. But now I'm handing over to our third speaker. So let's get some perspectives from a business aggregator in the region. And I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Undra, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Mongolian chapter of the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry. And Undra promotes gender and children's rights with business, and she has extensive experience with both the real estate and agricultural sector. Undra, as we celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the Children's Rights and Business Principles, we really welcome your insights on the work of the Women's Federation in making children's rights more visible in mechanisms and measures supporting responsible business conduct in Mongolia. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. IWFCI, a membership-based organization to promote business environment, and our chapters have organized a national and international event and activities in 17 countries. We usually have women-led companies as a member, which are facing some challenges expanding their business in terms exporting their goods to third country or receiving foreign direct investment. Especially women entrepreneurs comparing to mean lack of knowledge and the lack of access to information around business development. There are many programs and projects that support women entrepreneurship by providing trainings around business development and business management and production development. However, there are a lack of the information sharing around environmental, social, and governance requirements are in place for the companies wants to do export in third countries. There weren't any system and platform that promotes responsible business conduct in Mongolia. Since Mongolia is one of the GSP Plus beneficiary country with complete duty suspensions for products, we appreciate that the specific norm on the HRDD obligation for the business is being processed in the European Union. Therefore, IWFCI started to work on this area to help women entrepreneurs to access to global market in long run to expand their businesses to Mongolian foreign trade. Since 2019, we in IWFCI have been taking action to support businesses in Mongolia to better change and adapt to the upcoming regulations. The CRBPs become as a very clear and comprehensive guidance to help companies to understand what to do or what not to do, looking at the right of children more particularly. With the technical support of the UNICEF Mongolia, we have been conducting a series of training and workshops, as well as working on support, creating an enabling environment in which businesses can acquire skill in human rights due diligence and get more guidance on corporate sustainability, considering children as a key stakeholder. Mongolian companies have a track record in corporate sustainability with lens on the right of children today because of the push from entrepreneurs, women prioritizing the protection of the right of the children. However, there is still perception among businesses in Mongolia that children are beneficiaries of their charity rather than the right holders who are affected by business operations and lacking a voice to speak. As mother and women, they care a lot about the survival and the well-being children today and tomorrow. That's why it has been urgent for them to start prioritizing business and human rights action by focusing on the CRBPs. IWFCI has been taking three main approaches to promote and protect child rights among private sector. The first, we build awareness across the private sector by providing constant training modules of the CRBP. Secondly, we do policy advocacy to the government together with the government and UNICEF Mongolia. We have been organizing a series of events promoting family-friendly workplace policies, including on-site kindergarten for employers. Thirdly, we are contributing to develop enabling environment where private sector could receive HRDD consistently and services for specialized professionals and firms. In 2022, we have signed a commitment with UNICEF to ensure the child rights are embedded in HRDD process, driven by the IWFCI and service provided by sustainability consultants in Mongolia. We started working with lawyers and developed a HRDD toolkit based on the Mongolian legal system and country's own distinct. The success of this HRDD toolkit, we have included the CRBPs and unpacking them to the workplace with guidance on family-friendly policies such as on-site kindergarten and breastfeeding areas as they become available for companies globally. Since HRDD, we've introduced the country, 3 biggest companies from sectors such as food, pharmaceuticals, and services conducted HRDD against their operation. These companies have more than 2,000 employees and more than 200 suppliers. By the HRDD toolkit, those companies are assessed against their adverse human rights impact that they may cause or contribute to children's rights. Based on the outcome of HRDD, the companies have been working to improve their workplace to make it more family-friendly, as well as to update their regulation and contracts with their suppliers, as well as improving their policy and practices to marketplace in society. The initial results and reflection by the companies are: the first, the companies immediately establish a dedicated department and specialist who oversees sustainable and human rights. Secondly, companies have started working on the improvement of labor rights by reviewing and revising human resource policy and procedures. Particularly, they tend to implement family-friendly policies such providing daycare and kindergarten for their employees' children, establishing breastfeeding room, and improving working conditions of pregnant employees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Undra, for this presentation. And it's so encouraging to hear all the work that's happened to build the capacity of your members around the integration of child rights into the human rights due diligence processes. So really that infusion that Anita was referring to before is already happening through your members in Mongolia, and particularly with that focus on family-friendly policies. It's great to hear that there's a strong focus on that indirect impact on children through the way that we treat workers who are parents and caregivers. So thank you so much. So last but not least, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Luhur, who is the Special Advisor to the Minister of Social Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Unfortunately, Luhur was unable to travel, so he is joining us now from Indonesia. Luhur is also the former chairman of the Indonesian Association for Child-Friendly Companies, APSI. And in APSI, he supported the launch of the CRBPs also back in 2011 and has since played a critical role in integrating child rights into their certification criteria. Companies in Indonesia are looking into their supply chains, and they're looking at their products and markets to address adverse business impact. So given your role in championing the children's rights and business principles in Indonesia, please tell us more about the role that you see that public institutions can play in putting the legal and institutional frameworks in place to protect and respect and fulfill children's rights. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. Indeed, it is a very interesting topic. And speaking of the authorities, how they play the role in adoption of CRBP in Indonesia, I would like to share the journey that we as an association have been run through in the last 10 years or so. Our journey started in June, July 2010. Slide, please. Can the administrator help me with the slide? Right to the slide number 2, please. Yeah, this is a summary of the journey of the Indonesian Association of Child-Friendly Companies. We started in 2010, as I mentioned, when some businesses were invited by the Ministry of Women Empowerment and get the the shocking numbers of the Indonesian children situation, from the educational side, the health issues, the mortality rate, all those stuff. And then we share the same inconvenient feelings about the situation. Same concern raised in our mind, what we can do to be part of the solution. After the forum initiated by the government, then we conducted this series of discussion on what to do and how to do it best. The numbers of the members of the discussion forum then grew from 10 to 15, and at the end of 25 companies involved in the discussion. We discussed lots of things, from the regulation, from the local wisdom to came up with the Indonesian context of CRBP and how the principles and criteria of child-friendly companies can be imposed to businesses in Indonesia. Next slide, please. In 2011, we started the formulation of what we call 3 Ps of the association movement. This is the policy, product, and program. This is wholly adopted from the CRBP using Indonesian laws, as I mentioned, the culture and the government agendas to ensure a positive response from our colleagues in connection in business. The principle were then cascaded into 24 criteria and 49 indicators to guide members of our association to implement their commitment. Next slide, please. This is just these examples of how the members of our association implement CRBP in their daily operations. So, and next, please. Yeah. The 5 founding companies then formalized the initiative into a movement. Right now, we have 52 cities as branches all over the nation, with more than 1,000 companies joining the effort to really recognize and respect the child principle, the child rights and in business principles. The movement, however, this is the second aspect of the critical roles of the government. We got significant boost when the lawmakers agreed on underlining Article 72 of the Law Number 35, 2014, that mandated these 3 Ps. Stipulated by Article 72, companies in Indonesia are to respect and ensure the fulfillment of the rights of the child and their policies, product, and programs. I'll pause here, Ida, to get more views from the participants. And back to you, Ida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lehur, and thank you for these reflections around the role also of the government, of course, in putting in place the conditions and the environment that then allows companies to take concrete steps to adhere to the children's rights and business principles. And I think you're touching upon that, the important space and synergy between the public and the private sector in relation to bringing scale and sustainability to responsible business conduct in relation to children's rights. And of course, while now each of our panelists have presented some really encouraging initiatives and concepts and ideas and how they have tackled child rights impact by business, we also do know, of course, that this is not the reality across most of the region in terms of how companies are considering children as part of their business models or integrating them into their core business policies and processes. So you're leading the way with the work that you're doing, but obviously we see that much more action needs to happen. And I refer back to Anita's initial statements around looking specifically at the issues in marketing and advertising, for example, or in the workplace in relation to family-friendly workplace, or be it in relation to marketing in relation to obesity crisis, the environmental impacts on children that we see across the region. I mean, the climate crisis is a child rights crisis. And of course, also that this issue that the conversation too often starts and stops with child labor. We need to move beyond that conversation. But so Luhur, I want to turn back to you. I actually wonder if I could ask you to remove your mask, because I think that will help us better hear your comments, if you're in a space where that was possible. And then I wanted to ask you, what are some of the ways that existing mechanisms and measures governing business conduct could become more effective based on your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry I have to put on my mask because of
No
the
problem, no
situation
problem.
where I'm right now. But I hope the comments, my voice is well accepted there. My comment on that is it is indeed to narrow a topic. If we're talking about only child labor, in our recognition plan to companies, it is only 1 out of 49 indicators, as I mentioned. We encourage our members to comply with all indicators, including but not limited to the child labor issues. To those who comply, this is the mechanism we have in Indonesia. We give the carrots instead of the sticks. We call this Anugerah Pelangi, or Pelangi stands for Perusahaan Layak Anak Indonesia, child-friendly companies award. Since 2015, every 2 years, we do the assessment and we give the award to the companies, to the members that comply to these 49 indicators, including the child labor. The schedule was managed together with the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection to support the agenda of child-friendly city. This mechanism, we believe, was effective enough to measure our members from commitment, policy, initiative, and innovation as well. As shown by the slide, I'm not sure if I can go back to slide number 4, please. As shown by some of our members like Unilever, Kidzania, Astra International, this is just to name a few. The business practices that respect child-friendly policies indeed can go hand in hand with the commercial side and cases. Unilever, for example, previous slide, please. Slide number 4. I'm sure I had some pictures of the real action taken by our members. Yes, this one. Oh, no. Next one. With the pictures, please. Picture of Unilever, Kidzania. Go back. One more, please. Yeah, stop here. Okay, thank you. As shown by these samples of how Unilever, Kidzania, and Astra International, for example, companies can indeed run child-friendly policies, can produce only child-friendly products, and respect children in their corporate social responsibility program, while at the same time building a solid commercial case. Let's take Kidzania and also United Tractors, for example. It's a heavy-duty tractors producer in Indonesia, nothing to do with children directly. They join the association only because they care and then turn out to be getting financial benefits in return. They recently won a pitch to supply child-friendly buses for Jakarta public transportation system. So my point is, I think when heart and business come together, there is a momentum to adapt and adopt CRBP in Indonesia. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luhur. Yes, you did indeed. Thank you. But I wanted to now turn and talk some more around the mandatory human rights due diligence. And Undra, you mentioned specifically how important the human rights due diligence has been in Mongolia as a mechanism for enhancing business operations to comply with the new regulation that came as part of the EU trade policies. Could you tell us a bit more about what could be done over the next 10 years to see a transformation in the uptake of human rights due diligence in Mongolia? Thank you.
Thank you. I think as a business aggregator, we see our role as a promoter, enabler, and champion for private sector who wants to be more responsible and sustainable. And in this regard, we would like to suggest 3 steps needs to be taken forward by the stakeholders to see the results in 10 years. Government needs to communicate with the private sector about what are expectations from the European Union and other recipients countries, investors and consumers in terms of HRDD and the compliance. And also the government needs to adopt the NAP as soon as possible, by which mandatory HRDD integrated child rights is regulated. And government, as the biggest buyer of goods in the country, should regulate the mandatory HRDD for their venture companies of the state procurement. Government also should regulate that companies who are the issuing IPO and at the stock market in Mongolia, HRDD is required for all companies. If legal and policy environment is clear and international expectations are clearly communicated by the government, CSO is like our organization will continue to work on the development of enabling environment in which companies could access to up-to-date information, tools, guidance, and service around HRDD, ESG, and SDG. As we work closely with women parliament members in Mongolia on this issue of women entrepreneurs, we also continue to advocate and lobby for effective development and implementation of NAP of Mongolia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Andra. And thank you so much for reminding us of this importance of the national action plans. I know this has been a hot topic over the last few days here at the forum as well. And there's no going about it, that that's something that we're all looking for as an important part to see the implementation of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights really gets translated into concrete action on the ground. And so, Philip, I turn to you because I think it'd be great to hear more from you from that corporate perspective in terms of some of those tension points between, or it's not necessarily a tension point, but the voluntary measures versus mandatory human rights due diligence and how DG is positioning itself in that space. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So currently for us, human rights due diligence is still voluntary, right? So how we see it, because when you put something as mandatory and voluntary, there are pros and cons in both, and we always don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? So when you put in mandatory, then it could go to damage control aspect. You can see it again, it then parks itself again under risk management, right? But if you put it as voluntary, there is opportunities for companies to then start thinking about what are our stakeholders asking for. Is there an opportunity here for us to advocate this, to champion this? So there are benefits we see in both, whether make it, again, it's very hard to define human rights in this era. I think I was at a conference last week where we were talking about Internet of Dolls, right? Where we're looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning in dolls, right? And of course, that's a human rights issue that hasn't been discussed yet. So while certain issues are very pertinent and glaringly that you need it to be mandatory so that you can achieve scale throughout the industry, the breadth. But again, there are certain issues where voluntary allows you to go deep, the depth, and to have more dialogues and more honest dialogues. Because once you made it mandatory, sometimes it's hard to have honest dialogues around certain issues when it comes to human rights.
Thank you. Yes, we indeed need a smart mix of both the voluntary measures, but also those legislatory reforms that will drive a change in business action as it relates to respecting children's rights in the workplace, in the marketplace, in the community, and the environment. So I am going to open up for some questions and statements from the floor. So we actually already have a number of colleagues who have indicated their interest in speaking about their work on child rights and business in the region. And I know that we have ECPAT in the room, and I would therefore like to invite Ms. Rupali to make a statement. Over to you, Rupali.
Thank you, Ida. First, I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing your thoughts, experiences, and perspectives. And of course, reiterating and reinforcing the message that children and youth are central and need to be central to all conversations regarding decisions, processes, and policies, reflecting them and relating to them. Especially now, given that we've seen greater activism from children and youth. We are living in an increasingly digital world, and with the pandemic, there are competing priorities. It is quite critical that we have to maintain this balance between addressing all these concerns and development and progress, but not at the cost of children and the protection of children. And so therefore it does call for greater collaboration among all the stakeholders to ensure that communities are not exploited, caregivers are supported, and children are better protected. And that child participation is not a good to have, but it means that it should be meaningfully engaged with. So at ECPAT, we work a lot with governments, multi-stakeholders, private sector, especially in the context that we realize that there are a lot of interlinkages between the different sectors, the different spaces. And so I think Anita had probably referred to it, that the siloed approach has to go, the traditional way of thinking has to go, and you need to have a more holistic approach if you are to find solutions, practical and applicable solutions. Thanks.
Thank you so much for adding your perspective from ECPAT. And I also know that we have the Bandek Foundation in the room, I believe. So Bandek Foundation has been working with the Thai construction sector over the past many years to really adopt new standards for children in the construction sector. Do we have Bandek in the room?
Here.
Yes.
Sorry, hi.
Excellent. Thank you. Please come in. Is that Sebastian?
Yeah, Sebastian, yeah, thank you. Yeah, then Bandek, with the support of UNICEF, launched this year the Building Social Impact Initiative. And we believe this initiative can be seen as a practical example of operationalization of CRBP's principles in a high-risk sector, as you mentioned, such as the construction sector. Then, following a research we conducted, we estimate that around 60,000 migrant children are living in construction camps in Thailand and are at risk, facing important challenges to access their basic rights to live in a safe environment, to access education, health, and protection services. And following those findings, we partnered with private sector companies, pioneer companies from the construction sector, to develop practical solutions for the sector. And we designed a framework for action, which is in line with the CRBP, and also some very practical tools to ease the adoption of this framework. Then with those tools, the company can understand the potential risk they have on children in their activities. They can assess the situation in the camp. They can easily take action and identify priorities. They can monitor and report internally and externally for their social sustainability. Then this is good, and since the launch of this initiative, we have already 9 large companies who joined the initiative and engaged and commit to change their practices. This is great, and even greater to see that more companies are interested in this initiative. But as it has been said in the first day of this forum, sometimes we can have a very low learning curve from some companies or from the private sector, and we can provide free trainings, free tools, but yeah, when we will have more companies to join, we will have to face the problem of companies saying that they are joining but not adopting real practices in the camps, which takes me to my question. Then even if human rights due diligence become mandatory, we feel like there is still a gap on how the control, verification, and certification on the adoption of good practices in line with the CRBP will be done. As CSO, I don't think we have the mandate to do this. Then we would really be interested in knowing from the panelists how this question of control and verification can be approached, and if there are ideas emerging to fill in this gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and also for raising a question to our panelists as part of your intervention. And so I will now open it up for any questions or comments in the room. Yes, we'll take a few questions, starting with you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm representing Mongolia. Now that the business is mentioned, there are a lot of good initiatives like talent network, youth on-site capacity building, technology initiatives, including the digital literacy And also Indonesia has a lot of good experiences. But I'm here to actually ask, representing the SMEs, would developing facilities for children within the company is as one way showing the business and children's right. But what else for SMEs can do? Because the most SMEs have a lack of finance, capacity, resources, to develop all these great initiatives. So I would like to ask, now that Ms. Ondra has already shared her 3 steps, and I would like to ask the other panelists to share, the 3 steps that SMEs can do to joining to respect, business and children's rights in their operations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very relevant question. I'll just ask if there's one more question and then I'll hand over to the panelists to answer. Any more? And I don't think we have any online. Yes.
Hi, thanks, Ida. Just a quick question. Anita, I loved your infusing language at the beginning. Maybe we could just come back to that and any other practical examples you think going forward that you could leave us with around how to infuse child rights.
That's great. Anita will actually do some closing reflections from us in terms of next steps. So we'll make sure to capture that there. Thank you, Tim. All right. So there was 2 questions for the panelists, specifically on control and verification measures, but also in relation to proposal around 3 concrete steps for SMEs that they can take for the integration of child rights into their policies and processes. Will I hand over to you first, Philip?
Sure. Let me start off. For the first question on control and verification, again, I think most companies or business are very familiar with assurance process, especially finance assurance. And nowadays we have a lot of ESG data assurance. But for me, the devil is always in the details, right? And to be able to see, for example, a lot of company, they will tell you that we've done engagements with 5 million children in 3 years, but what's the impact? What's the progress? Is there some sort of measurable progress? And I think that's when control and assurance comes in to truly look at in what ways is it sustainable. And you can have two figures. One, the number of young people that you've engaged with, but the number of young people who has made impact on it, right? So to go one layer down, I think that's important. Then perhaps to the second question on SMEs, I've actually found some SMEs to be extremely inspiring. A reason because SMEs have to specialize in order to thrive. There are certain SMEs in Malaysia because their business model is mainly, example, with UK or US or with certain countries, and they've actually, being the supply chain, they've actually adopted best practices that is still not being pushed in this country. And we actually learn from these SMEs. These are the type of requirements by leading companies in the world. And it's something that sometimes we kind of reverse engineer in the sense that we've tried to incorporate what we've learned from these SMEs into our organization. So SMEs have to be able to bring out that value by their specialization and what they found as their main point of differentiation.
Thank you, Philip. And I wonder, should I turn to Mr. Luhur online? So make sure
Sure.
you too. Thank you.
Yeah, I think these 2 questions are very relevant to Indonesian case as well. The verification and SMEs. These 2 questions actually has been key to our effort. And in the beginning, we were also struggling with the issues. Later on, then we created a tool as simple as possible, also with guidance and also the key indicators to be followed by our members. I know 49 indicators seems to be very complicated, but in fact, it comes with a checklist. So even SMEs, and most of our members are SMEs for your information, they just need to follow the checklist. It's pretty much like doing an ISO self-assessment process for the operation. For example, we have some SMEs in culinary business as well. They just need to ensure that the children who are at home because the SME mostly running their business at home. Hence, children presence in work is unavoidable, yet they need to follow some sort of rules on how to ensure the children are not exposed to any dangerous situation in the area of businesses at home. The principles also apply to different type of industries, sizes, areas as well. So if we were to start the 3 steps, I would recommend our members to start with the policy. Child labor is one, lactation room is another thing. And yes, big companies have the advantages to comply that easily, and SME is in a completely different landscape. But there are things from policy perspective that can be done easily and followed by the SME as well. The product, as I mentioned, there are companies from SME in ready-to-drink industry, for example, that have been reducing the number of sugar just to ensure the product is more healthy to children. That's another example. And also at the end is the program, the step 3, which is we only encourage the companies to because CSR in Indonesia context is a must. It is regulated also by law. So all companies, including the SME, had to have a program to support the corporate social responsibility, while at the same time we infuse or impose the children perspective into the CSR. That's pretty much the tips from our journey, Ida. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Luhur. And so, Ms. Undra, I hand over to you as for the final set of comments and answers. Okay, yes, that's okay. You can answer that now.
I think in Mongolia, it depends. Then I'm not sure that about the assurance. Now it's on the progress. So maybe it depends on the government and also the NAP and then toolkits. It's maybe the assurance. I think so. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So before I'm going to hand over to Anita for some summary remarks and also reflect on what we've heard in the room today, just checking that there was no additional comments or questions.
Sorry, we have one more question coming from the participants. The question is, what are some practical steps that can be taken to highlight children as a key stakeholder for businesses that may not see children as key? It's an open question for the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, Philip, you want to start us off with some practical steps a company can take to start thinking about children as a stakeholder, even if they're not considering children as a stakeholder?
I think, especially in the digital space, every industry is now moving in a digital age, right? And you're adopting solutions and you're looking for more ways to crisscross across industries for synergy. And I think sometimes to just allow that industry to realize that without looking at children as a stakeholder, you're actually losing out on a very valuable data input stream, right? Children who are always exploring and trying out new things, right? And because of the interest level, they are able to move from one to another very quickly, right? So most companies love to do pilot testing, right? Pilot testing tells me whether it's something that I should invest in or something I should shy away, right? And companies who are not looking at children as a huge stakeholder, who in many sense today influence their parents, right? Most of us learn about new platforms and new apps from our children, right? And if you want to reach your stakeholder today who is an aging generation, and you're not looking at the next generation to begin that dialogue, you will probably lose out in the long run, right? So I think having those conversations with leaders of the company would help them understand why this is so important. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Philip. Undra or Mr. Luhur, would you want to make any additional comment? No? Yes. Mr. Luhur, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, if I were to give sort of practical tips for the audience on the key areas of creating a relevance to businesses, I would suggest that these two things, children's rights and business principle, is definitely not to be polarized. It can go hand in hand. In fact, we have members who have children as market, so they do understand that the voice of children, pretty much like what PG said, is pretty critical to their product development, their market development as well. On the other side, we have to also understand that caregivers, which is the employees, are also the key factors that is important. Our employees are the caregivers of the children. So in the area of human resources development, it is very critical to increase the loyalty of our employees by having favorable policies for them to stay with us, to be loyal to a company. On the other hand, the compliance is also an issue that is also, I found it very interesting and relevant to our members as well. So when the government introduced law number 35 in 2014, the movement of 3Ps in Indonesia got significant boost, as I mentioned. So the numbers we achieved, more than 1,000, was practically in the last 5-6 years after the lawmakers passed the law number 35. That's probably the tips. Thank you, Ida.
Thank you so much. And on those notes, I would now like to invite Anita to make some final reflection based on what you've heard here today, and also in terms of how you started out setting the scene for today's session about what are at our disposal in terms of taking forward this agenda and be even bolder than we already are.
Great, thank you. And I have to say thank you for an excellent panel, because we see it's possible. We've gotten really 3 very different, but I think compelling presentations. So a few things. I do want to address assurance first and some general reflections on that. Assurance is never going to be perfect. And right now we're in a very information vacuum, right? In terms of actually trying to do verification of human rights due diligence well. So what does that mean? What it means is for companies and for civil society and for everybody that you need multiple data points to always really benchmark a company. So that means looking at the company's own policies, looking at external benchmarks, looking at what verification or assurance companies or consultants are saying. But frankly, what you need always is civil society and stakeholders to be the watchdog and a channel back to the company or to the business association or initiative, because ultimately they will be the real safeguard. So that means partnership in the area of children's rights with key stakeholders and CSOs in key regions where a business operates, because they will, if they know that they can be the eyes and ears, even though that's not a perfect safeguard, it's an important channel of communication. So that's, I think, the best piece of the solution. But back to what can be done in terms of this integration, right? I was part of the UN Working Group, we have UNICEF, we work closely together, but we didn't integrate our documentation as well as we should. So governments and policymakers, national action plans need to infuse the national action plans with recommendations and key priorities and key commitments from government around children's rights. And this is, I think, the starting point, is that the National Action Plan identifies priority areas, provides some ideas for where companies should move and how they can do it. And if the National Action Plan is already baked, as we say, already cooked, then you can create an addendum, right? You can update the National Action Plan with a new kind of set of priorities around children's rights and sort of how they relate to the larger agenda. So that is the starting point, is that the National Action Plan sets the stage. And that means that governments should be consulting with stakeholders that represent children's interests as part of the process, invite children's rights groups to be advisors, to testify, to be part of that. And government should insist through the National Action Plan that rights holders' engagement includes youth. The other thing a National Action Plan can do is make the case for business. Really explain what Philip said. Children are the future of our economies, especially economies that have a young population. So make the case and provide the sort of the road ahead. To companies, again, I think it's important for them to say, or to just think and to stop and say, beyond some of the big issues which a NAP can address. So family-friendly workplace, we're hearing about from everybody here, right? That's a key area that should be a shared interest for everybody. But what else? That comes from just stopping and asking, how does our business possibly reach children? And what I think we've seen is that many companies, Philips company is different. We're hearing it, never even ask that question. I'll just give you a big example. The digital space is that Facebook really didn't bother asking whether Instagram had a specific impact on young girls. Now we know it does. And this is the same thing that happens, is that companies are surprised by this. So for any business, a small SME, it's just sitting and having that first conversation, not only in the company, but with youth of, do you use our product or service? And then starting to think whether it's a food product that you're marketing, whether it's a digital project that you're marketing, whether you're a construction company and you're actually working to build spaces for refugees and migrants, how is that space impacting youth and children? And once you ask that question, then the due diligence that follows becomes simpler. So I just want to emphasize for companies, it shouldn't be that difficult. It's simply saying, oh, are there impacts on children? It's asking the question. And frankly, we haven't asked the question. And so that's what UNICEF is reminding us to do. And then finally, last piece, we haven't talked a lot about access to remedy. This is another challenging area, but we need to think about, do we actually have mechanisms by which children can reach a company if there is a problem? And how are they age appropriate and adequate? Are there safeguards for the confidentiality of the information they're providing to the company when they're doing that? So I would say, I hope in the next decade that will also be part of the solution, is access to remedy as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. And there is so much to celebrate, as all of our great panelists today has reminded us, but we also see that there is a great path ahead of us in terms of the work that needs to be done. And thank you also for reminding us on the access to remedy and making sure that's age appropriate, such an important topic. But I really just want to thank all of you for coming and joining this session today, whether or not you were here in the room or you were with us online. It was great to hear also the comments from the speakers in the room and to hear that there is so much work happening. I want to do a special shout out to my colleague Carla, who is the master brain behind this panel. Thank you. And then for those who have come in with questions asking about whether or not this material will be available, there will be an email sent to you by the organizers with all the live content from these sessions. So you will be able to review the PowerPoint presentations again and hear the audio file, of course. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much. Have a great day.